So, hello guys, welcome back. We need to talk about the exact moment I realized that the entire rest of the world thinks Americans are deeply, fundamentally brainwashed. I mean, I was literally shocked. I was sitting in a pub in London with a group of British friends, and somehow the topic of American schools came up. I was casually explaining the Pledge of Allegiance, just offhandedly mentioning how we put our hands over our hearts every single morning, face the flag, and chant a loyalty oath to the country in unison. And they all just stopped talking. They looked at me with absolute horror. One of them actually leaned back, took a sip of his pint, and said, "Olivia, you do realize that sounds exactly like a cult, right?" I started to defend it. I was like, "No, no, no, it's just patriotism, it's just what we do." But as the words were leaving my mouth, I heard them from an outsider's perspective for the very first time. I realized, wait, why do we do that? In the US, we would never question it. It's so normalized. But here is the truth, and this is a harsh truth. The rest of the developed world looks at our blind, unquestioning loyalty to the American system, and they see a masterclass in psychological conditioning. They think we are brainwashed. And honestly, after living outside of the US for 2 years, I am starting to think they are completely right. Let's actually dive into the Pledge of Allegiance, because the historical context of this is mind-blowing, and they definitely do not teach us this in school. We just assume the pledge has been there since George Washington crossed the Delaware. No, the Pledge of Allegiance was written in 1892 by a man named Francis Bellamy. And do you know why he wrote it? He worked for a magazine called The Youth's Companion, and they were running a promotional campaign to sell American flags to public schools. It was literally a marketing gimmick. And the original salute to the flag? It wasn't a hand over the heart, it was a stiff-armed salute outward. It was called the Bellamy salute. It was only changed in 1942 to the hand over the heart because, well, another guy in Europe was using a stiff-armed salute and we had to distance ourselves from that. Oh, and the under God part? That wasn't added until 1954 during the Cold War to differentiate us from the godless communists in the Soviet Union. When you explain that history to a British person, they look at you like you have three heads. Because in the UK, if you fly a British flag outside your house on a random Tuesday, people don't think you're a patriot. They think you are a raging nationalist or part of a far-right political group, or just completely weird. In the US, we have flags on our porches, on our trucks, on our t-shirts, on our paper plates at barbecues. We are constantly reminding ourselves of where we live as if we are going to forget. The psychological analysis of this is fascinating. From a very young age, Americans are subjected to a constant loop of symbolic reinforcement. If you tell a child every single day that they live in the greatest country on earth, and you make them swear allegiance to a piece of cloth before they even know what the words allegiance or republic mean, you are creating a population that will inherently defend the state, even when the state is actively failing them. And speaking of the state failing us, we need to talk about hustle culture, because this is where the brainwashing gets genuinely dangerous. I want to talk about paid time off, or PTO. When I got my first job here in the UK, I was handed a contract, and I was reading through it, and I literally stopped and had to ask HR if there was a typo. The contract said I was entitled to 28 days of paid leave plus bank holidays. And I was like, wait, is this unpaid? And they were like, no, it's paid. I was literally shocked. I thought it was a special perk of the company. It is not a perk, it is the law. The UK's working time regulations legally mandate that almost all workers are entitled to 5.6 weeks of paid holiday a year. Every single country in the European Union has a statutory minimum of at least 4 weeks of paid vacation. Do you know what the federally mandated minimum for paid time off is in the United States? 0. 0 days. The US is the only advanced economy in the world that does not guarantee its workers paid vacation. Also, the public videos are only part of it. So join the membership below if you want the version where I go further, say more, and share the extra bits that do not always make it into the main upload. But here is where the brainwashing comes in. How does the US government and corporate America get away with this without us rioting in the streets? Because they have successfully branded exhaustion as a virtue. They have convinced us that working yourself to the bone, never taking a sick day, and answering emails at 11 p.m. is a sign of moral superiority. We call it the grind. We call it hustle culture. When an American boasts about not having taken a vacation in 3 years, they aren't complaining, they are bragging. We have been psychologically conditioned to tie our self-worth directly to our economic output. I was talking to a British colleague about this, and he said, why do Americans act like their boss is doing them a favor by employing them? And it hit me like a ton of bricks. In the US, we are terrified of our employers, and we are terrified because of the most sinister piece of structural brainwashing of all, tying our healthcare to our employment. When you tell a British person that losing your job in America means you also lose your ability to go to the doctor, they literally cannot comprehend it. Here in the UK, they have the NHS. You get sick, you go to the hospital, you get treated, you go home, you do not see a bill, period. In America, your health insurance is a leash held by your employer. Of course, we don't take vacations. Of course, we tolerate toxic work environments. Of course, we don't strike or unionize at the same rates as Europeans. Because if we get fired, we don't just lose our income. We lose our insulin. We lose our kids' asthma medication. We face total financial ruin if we break an arm. The psychological terror of medical bankruptcy is a uniquely American experience. And to keep us from realizing how incredibly dystopian this is, we are fed this counter-argument constantly. Well, we have the best healthcare in the world, and socialized medicine means you wait 6 months for a surgery. That is the lie we are fed. We are taught to be terrified of socialism without ever actually defining what it is. The truth is, Americans spend more per capita on healthcare than any other wealthy nation, yet we have the lowest life expectancy among them, the highest chronic disease burden, and the highest rate of avoidable deaths. We are paying luxury prices for a broken system, and we defend it because we have been brainwashed into believing that anything else is a loss of freedom. Speaking of our bizarre relationship with healthcare, let's talk about something I had completely forgotten existed until I went back to the States to visit my parents. Pharmaceutical commercials. Oh my God. We need to talk about this. I was sitting on my parents' couch in Ohio, watching normal daytime television, and suddenly an ad comes on. It's this beautifully shot, slow-motion video of a woman in a linen dress walking a golden retriever on a sun-dappled beach. She looks so happy. She's smiling at her handsome husband. Gentle acoustic guitar music is playing in the background. And meanwhile, a very soothing voiceover is quickly reading a script that says side effects may include internal bleeding, loss of vision, sudden cardiac arrest, temporary paralysis, and death. I burst out laughing. It is absolutely unhinged. In the UK and in virtually the entire rest of the world, advertising prescription medication directly to consumers is highly, strictly illegal. The only 2 countries in the world that allow direct consumer advertising for prescription drugs are the United States and New Zealand. That is it. When I tried to explain these commercials to my British friends, they were totally baffled. They asked the most logical question: why is a TV commercial telling you what medication to take? Isn't that your doctor's job? And I realized, oh my God, they are right. In the US, the FDA changed the regulations in 1997 to loosen the rules on broadcast advertising for pharmaceuticals, as long as they included a major statement of the side effects. That one structural change unleashed billions of dollars in marketing. The psychological impact of this is profound. We don't view medicine as a clinical scientific necessity. We view it as a consumer product. We are trained to go to our doctors who spent a decade in medical school and say, hey, I saw a commercial with a golden retriever, can I get some Zoloft? We are brainwashed into treating our own health like we are shopping at a mall, completely enriching a pharmaceutical industry that profits off our perpetual sickness. Now let's completely switch gears and talk about money. Specifically, the absolute scam that is tipping culture and how it proves we are brainwashed to protect corporations. In the UK, when you go to a restaurant, the price you see on the menu is the price you pay. The tax is already included. You don't have to do mental math, and tipping, it's not mandatory. If the service is genuinely exceptional, you might leave 10%, but nobody is going to chase you down the street if you don't. British waiters are paid a standard legal minimum wage by their employer. In the US, we would never accept that. Right? We defend tipping. We say, well, tipping ensures good service. Tipping helps the waiter make more money. Do you want to know the historical context of American tipping? Because it's dark. Tipping originated in Europe as an aristocratic practice, but it was largely rejected by early Americans as being undemocratic. It felt like creating a master-servant dynamic. But after the Civil War, tipping exploded in the US. Why? Because the Pullman Company, which ran the luxury sleeping cars on trains, hired thousands of recently freed black men as porters. Instead of paying them a real wage, the company forced them to rely entirely on tips from wealthy white passengers. Tipping was literally popularized in America as a way for corporations to avoid paying black workers a fair wage. And today, we still have a federally mandated tipped minimum wage of $2.13 an hour. $2.13. That number hasn't changed since 1991. The restaurant industry lobby has spent millions of dollars to ensure that they do not have to pay their own employees a living wage. But the incredible part is how they have brainwashed the American public into fighting each other over it. When a waiter in America can't pay their rent, who do they get mad at? They get mad at the customer who only left a 10% tip. And who does the customer get mad at? They get mad at the waiter for expecting 25% for just carrying a plate of fries. We are fighting each other, we are screaming at each other on TikTok about whether or not we should tip the barista who turned an iPad around. We are totally distracted, while the multi-million-dollar restaurant corporations are sitting back, laughing, completely off the hook for paying their own staff. We have been brainwashed to view the customer as the employer, subsidizing the payroll of massive corporations out of a misguided sense of moral obligation. If a business model relies on the charity of the customer just to keep the staff out of poverty, that is a failed business model. But in America, we call it the service industry. And you know what else is a scam that we just blindly accept? Taxes. Oh my God, doing taxes in the US is a traumatizing annual event. We have to collect our W-2s, our 1099-S, our receipts, and we sit at our computers sweating, terrified that if we carry a 1 incorrectly, the IRS is going to kick down our door and send us to federal prison. We spend hours using software like TurboTax, which costs us money to figure out exactly what we owe the government. When April rolled around during my first year in the UK, I started panicking. I went to my British friend and said, "Where do I file my taxes? Do I need to hire an accountant?" She looked at me like I was insane. She said, "What are you talking about? Your taxes are already done." Here in the UK, they use a system called PAYE, which stands for Pay As You Earn. The government already knows how much you make. They automatically deduct the exact right amount of tax from your paycheck every month. At the end of the year, if you overpaid, they just send you a check. If you underpaid, they adjust your tax code for the next year. You don't file a return unless you are a freelancer or a business owner. It takes 0 minutes. It costs $0. So why do Americans have to do this incredibly stressful, complicated math test every year when the IRS already knows the answer? Because of corporate lobbying. Companies like Intuit, the maker of TurboTax, and H&R Block have spent tens of millions of dollars lobbying the US government, literally writing legislation to legally prevent the IRS from creating a free, automated tax filing system. They created the Free File Alliance as a smokescreen, which deliberately hid its free options from search engines so people would be forced to pay. But the psychological analysis of this is even deeper. Why do conservative politicians support keeping taxes complicated? Because if tax day is a miserable, anxiety-inducing nightmare that costs you time and money, you are going to subconsciously hate taxes. And if you hate taxes, you are much more likely to vote for politicians who promise to lower them, which usually just means lowering them for corporations and the ultra-wealthy. We are being subjected to bureaucratic psychological warfare just to manufacture anti-tax sentiment and prop up a multi-billion-dollar tax prep industry. And we just accept it as a fact of life. I think the overarching theme here, the umbrella under which all this brainwashing happens, is the concept of American exceptionalism. This is the biggest lie we are fed, and it starts the second we enter the education system. When you look at a world map in a US classroom, America is usually placed smack dead in the center. We are taught a version of history that completely glosses over our atrocities. We learn about manifest destiny, not as a brutal campaign of imperial expansion and indigenous genocide, but as a noble, inevitable march of progress. We are taught that we single-handedly won World War II. We are told repeatedly that we are the leaders of the free world and that everyone else is desperately jealous of our freedoms. Living abroad completely shatters this illusion. When an American says, "We are the freest country on earth," a European will genuinely ask, "Free to do what?" Are you free to go to school without the paralyzing fear of a mass shooting? Because in the UK, there hasn't been a school shooting since Dunblane in 1996, after which they immediately changed their gun laws. In America, we are brainwashed to believe that the blood of our children is just the price we have to pay for the Second Amendment. Are you free to eat food that isn't actively poisoning you? When I go to a grocery store here in London, I am buying food that is strictly regulated by the Food Standards Agency. In the US, the FDA allows dozens of chemicals, preservatives, and food dyes that are outright banned in Europe. Things like red 40, yellow 5, potassium bromate in our bread, high fructose corn syrup pumped into literally everything. We wash our chicken in chlorine because our factory farming conditions are so unsanitary. And why? Because in the 1970s, farm policies pushed by politicians like Earl Butz heavily subsidized corn and soy, completely handing over our food supply to massive agrochemical corporations. We are brainwashed into thinking that a $2 box of neon-colored cereal is convenience, when in reality, it is corporate-sponsored malnutrition. Also, tiny interruption, but this is actually crazy. Around 87% of you watching are not subscribed yet. So if you enjoy these little deep dives into all the strange ways Britain keeps confusing me, subscribe now because I am nowhere near done. Are you free to walk down the street or take public transit? In most of America, you are absolutely trapped if you do not own a car. Our cities were bulldozed. In the mid-20th century, entire minority neighborhoods were destroyed just to build the interstate highway system. The automotive and oil lobbies actively bought up and dismantled public streetcar systems in cities like Los Angeles. We are forced to spend tens of thousands of dollars on cars, insurance, and gas just to participate in society, and we call it the freedom of the open road. In Europe, true freedom is being able to hop on a high-speed, affordable train and safely travel across the country while reading a book. This is the hardest part about being an American expat. It's not that I hate America. I love my country. I miss the friendliness of Americans. I miss the optimism. I miss the sheer scale of the national parks. But loving your country shouldn't mean being blind to its flaws. The reason the world thinks we are brainwashed is because we are uniquely incapable of accepting criticism. If a British person complains about the UK government, another British person will join in and complain harder. If a French person doesn't like a new law, they will literally set a car on fire and shut down Paris for a week. But if an American complains about America, the immediate knee-jerk reaction from half the country is, well, if you don't like it, leave. We treat our country not as a government that works for us, but as a religion that we must fiercely defend against heretics. We defend the billionaires who pay zero taxes. We defend the politicians who engage in insider trading. We defend the health insurance executives who deny our claims. We defend a system that is actively crushing us because we have been sold the myth of the American dream. We have been brainwashed to believe that we are not a struggling working class being exploited by corporate oligarchy, but rather, as the famous quote goes, we are all just temporarily embarrassed millionaires. We believe that if we just hustle harder, skip our vacations, pledge harder to the flag, and pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, we will eventually be the ones at the top. And until we wake up, step outside of our own bubble and realize that the rest of the world is living in societies designed to support human life rather than just extract profit from it, we will continue to be exactly what they think we are, brainwashed.